The sharp crack of the gavel silenced the crowded saloon as Clara Addington stood before the makeshift town council of Whispering Creek, Colorado, in the summer of 1876. Her chin lifted defiantly as 5 stern-faced men stared down at her from behind a long oak table. "Miss Addington, this is the 3rd time this month you've disrupted a town meeting with your opinions," Mayor Wilkins said, smoothing his gray mustache with thick fingers. "Women are to be seen and not heard in matters of governance." "But the water rights you're discussing affect my land too," Clara protested, her voice clear as a bell in the hushed room. "The Henderson mining operation is diverting the creek away from enough." The mayor's fist struck the table. "This constant chatter and challenging of your betters must stop. Perhaps a night contemplating your place outside our town walls will remind you of proper womanly conduct." Whispers rippled through the room. Being put outside the safety of the settlement after dark was no small punishment, especially with reports of outlaws in the hills. "You cannot be serious," Clara said, her blue eyes widening, but they were. As the sun dipped low in the western sky, Clara found herself escorted to the edge of town, beyond the protective wooden fence that separated civilization from the wild. The guard handed her a single wool blanket. "Council says you can return at first light," he mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. "Assuming you learn to hold your tongue." The gate creaked shut behind him, leaving Clara alone with the approaching night and the vast Colorado wilderness stretching before her. Her calico dress offered little protection against the cooling air as she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "Barbarians," she muttered, settling onto a flat rock. "They think silence is a virtue only when it comes from a woman's lips." The 25-year-old schoolteacher had come west from Boston 2 years earlier, seeking independence after her parents' passing left her with modest means but no prospects. She'd imagined the frontier would welcome her educated mind and progressive ideas. Instead, she found the same narrow thinking, just with more dust and fewer amenities. As darkness fell completely, Clara's indignation gave way to unease. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and every rustling bush made her tense. She'd need to stay awake and alert all night. To keep herself company, she began talking aloud, reciting poetry, and then launching into a passionate monologue about women's suffrage that she'd never dare deliver in town. "And furthermore, a woman's intelligence is not diminished by her gender, any more than a man's is elevated by his," she declared to the stars. "If they'd only listen, I'm listening," came a deep voice from the darkness. Clara gasped, jumping to her feet and clutching her blanket like a shield. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, leading a dappled gray horse. The moonlight revealed a man in his early 30s, broad-shouldered with a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Name's Blake Donovan," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. "And you're either the bravest or most foolish woman I've ever encountered, making speeches to coyotes after dark." Clara lifted her chin. "I'm neither brave nor foolish, I'm exiled. The town council decided my opinions were too numerous and too loudly expressed." Blake's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. "They put you out here for talking too much. What kind of men would do such a thing?" "The kind who run Whispering Creek," Clara replied bitterly. "I'm the schoolteacher. Apparently, I should restrict my education of females to needlepoint and proper table settings." Blake shook his head and stepped closer, his spurs jingling softly. "You've got a voice I'll listen to," he said simply, "and I'd wager what you have to say is worth hearing." Clara studied him warily. His clothes were dusty but decent, his gun worn but not flashy like a gunslinger's. His eyes, even in the dim light, seemed kind. "Are you an outlaw?" she asked directly. He laughed, a warm sound that somehow eased her fear. "No, madam, cattle rancher. My place is about 5 miles north. I was tracking a mountain lion that's been after my calves when I heard you giving what sounded like a right proper speech. And you stopped to listen rather than shoot me for trespassing. I figured anyone brave enough to lecture the wilderness deserved an audience," he replied with a smile. "Now, I can't in good conscience leave you out here alone. My cabin isn't far. You'd be safe there until morning." Clara hesitated. Going with a stranger posed its own dangers, but staying alone all night seemed the greater risk. "I promise you'll be treated with respect," Blake added, seeming to read her thoughts. "I have a spare room where my sister stays when she visits. You can lock the door if it makes you feel safer." "Why would you help me?" Clara asked, still suspicious. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because any town that would silence a woman for speaking her mind isn't worth protecting." Something in his straightforward manner convinced her. "Very well, Mr. Donovan. I accept your offer." He helped her onto his horse, then led the animal by the reins, walking alongside. As they traveled, Clara found herself telling him about her journey west, her teaching position, and her frustrations with the town's limitations. "Most women come out here as wives or to find husbands," Blake observed. "Not many venture west alone." "I'm not most women," Clara replied. "My father was a professor. He believed women deserved education equal to men's. When he died, I decided to bring that belief west where it was needed most." "Noble cause," Blake said. "Challenging, though." "All worthwhile things are challenging, Mr. Donovan." His cabin appeared on the horizon, a solid structure with a stone chimney and a corral for horses. It was larger than Clara expected, with a covered porch and glass window signs of prosperity unusual for a lone rancher. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and bookshelves filled with volumes that immediately caught Clara's attention. "You read," she said, unable to hide her surprise. Blake smiled as he lit a lantern. "Did you think cowboys were illiterate?" "Many are," she replied honestly, "or at least they've had little formal education." "My mother was like your father," he explained, stoking the banked fire. "Believed everyone deserved learning. She taught me and my sister to read before we could ride." Clara's estimation of him rose considerably. As promised, he showed her to a small but clean bedroom and politely excused himself while she settled in. She turned the key in the lock, but found her fear had largely dissipated. Unable to sleep, she examined the bookshelf in her room, finding classics alongside practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture. Her fingers traced the spines reverently. A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Addington, I've made some coffee if you'd care for some." Clara opened the door to find Blake holding 2 steaming mugs. She accepted one gratefully and followed him back to the main room, where they sat before the fire. "Now," he said, settling into his chair, "I believe you were giving a speech about women's suffrage when I interrupted." "I'd be interested to hear the rest." Clara stared at him. "You're mocking me." "Not at all," he replied seriously. "I've read some of Miss Anthony's arguments, compelling stuff, but I've never heard a first-hand account from someone actually fighting for the cause." For a moment, Clara was speechless, a rare occurrence. Then, tentatively at first but with growing confidence, she began to speak. Blake listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. Their conversation flowed easily, moving from politics to literature to ranching. Dawn was breaking before Clara realized they'd talked through the night. "I should return to town," she said reluctantly. "My students will be waiting." Blake nodded. "I'll take you back, though I'm half tempted to suggest you don't return at all." "I can't abandon my students," Clara said firmly. "Especially the girls. They need to see a woman who stands her ground." He smiled with admiration. "Then I'll make sure you get back safely." As they rode toward Whispering Creek, Clara sitting behind Blake on his horse, she realized she'd never felt so comfortable with anyone before, especially a man. Most men in her experience either dismissed her opinions or humored her briefly before changing the subject. Blake had engaged with her ideas, challenging some points while conceding others. When the town came into view, Clara felt a strange reluctance. "Will I see you again, Mr. Donovan?" "Blake," he corrected. "And yes, if you'd like, I come into town for supplies every Saturday." "I would like that very much," she admitted. At the town gate, Blake helped her down from his horse. The guard looked astonished to see Clara returning with company. "This lady was left outside all night," Blake said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "If that ever happens again, you'll answer to me personally." "Understood," the guard nodded nervously, recognizing the rancher's reputation even if Clara didn't. Until Saturday, Miss Addington, Blake said, tipping his hat before riding away. Clara walked through town with her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Her night outside the walls had been meant as punishment, but instead it felt like the beginning of something new. Saturday couldn't come quickly enough. When it did, Clara found herself checking her appearance more carefully than usual before heading to the general store, where Blake had mentioned he did his trading. She spotted him immediately, his tall frame distinctive among the townspeople. He was engaged in conversation with Sheriff Miller, but his eyes lit up when he saw her enter. "Miss Addington," he greeted her warmly. "I was hoping to see you today." "Mr. Donovan," she replied, suddenly shy despite their hours of conversation days earlier. "Blake was just telling me about finding you outside the town gates," Sheriff Miller said, looking uncomfortable. "I want you to know I had no part in that decision. The mayor acted without consulting me." "Thank you, Sheriff," Clara said. Though I must admit, the experience had unexpected benefits. Her eyes met Blake's briefly. The sheriff excused himself, leaving them alone among the barrels and shelves of merchandise. "I brought you something," Blake said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a newspaper, the latest edition of The Revolution, Susan B., Anthony's women's rights publication. Clara's eyes widened. "How did you get this? It's nearly impossible to find out here." "I have connections in Denver," he said with a modest shrug. "I thought you might enjoy reading it." "This is..." Clara found herself genuinely touched. "Thank you." They walked together through town, drawing curious glances. Blake Donovan was known and respected in the area, and seeing him deliberately seeking out the controversial schoolteacher set tongues wagging. "Would you join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant?" he asked. "Unless you're concerned about your reputation," Clara laughed. "My reputation is already that of a troublesome, overeducated spinster. Dining with you can hardly damage it further." Over dinner, Blake told her more about himself, how he'd come west after the war, built his ranch from nothing, and now employed several hands to manage his growing herd. "My sister Catherine helps when she visits from Denver," he explained. "She's married to a banker there. Has 3 children who love visiting their uncle's ranch." "You're close to your family," Clara observed. "What's left of them?" Blake nodded. "Our parents are gone now. What about yours?" "It's just me," Clara said. "I had a brother, but he died in the war. My parents never recovered from the loss. Father's heart gave out 3 years ago, and mother followed 6 months later." Blake's hand covered hers briefly. "I'm sorry. Losing family changes you." "It does," she agreed. "It made me realize life is too short to live by others' expectations." Their conversation was interrupted when Mayor Wilkins approached their table, his expression strained. "Miss Addington," he said stiffly. "Mr. Donovan." Blake's posture changed subtly, becoming more alert. "Mayor, join us?" "No, thank you." Wilkins cleared his throat. "I merely wish to inform Miss Addington that the school board will be meeting Monday to discuss her continued employment." Clara felt her heart sink, but kept her expression neutral. "On what grounds, may I ask?" "Concerns have been raised about your suitability as a moral example to impressionable young minds," he replied. Blake's voice was deceptively casual. "Interesting timing, Mayor. Almost seems like retaliation for Miss Addington finding support after your shameful punishment." Wilkins flushed. "This is town business, Donovan. You may own half the county, but Whispering Creek governs itself." "And who governs the governors?" Clara asked softly. "When justice becomes persecution, who speaks for those silenced?" "This is precisely the kind of trouble-making rhetoric," Wilkins began. "That makes people think," Blake interrupted. "Heaven forbid." The mayor departed in a huff, leaving Clara staring at her plate. "I'm going to lose my position," she said quietly. "You might," Blake acknowledged. "Or you might find more allies than you expect. This town needs your voice, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent a strange warmth through her. Over the next week, Blake became a regular visitor to Whispering Creek. He spoke with influential residents, including the banker, the newspaper editor, and several prominent wives. By the time the school board meeting convened, Clara was surprised to find the room packed with supporters. Mrs. Henderson, wife of the mining magnate, stood to speak. "My daughters have flourished under Miss Addington's teaching." They can now calculate figures better than my husband's clerk and write letters that would make any mother proud. If progressive ideas come with such results, I welcome them. One by one, parents and community members voiced their support. Even the sheriff spoke about the importance of education and free speech in a democracy. Mayor Wilkins looked increasingly uncomfortable as the tide turned against him. When Blake finally rose to speak, the room fell silent. "Whispering Creek stands at a crossroads," he said. "We can be a backward town that fears new ideas and silences those who speak them, or we can be a community that values education and progress. Miss Addington represents the future. How we treat her shows what kind of place we want this to be." The vote to retain Clara was unanimous, save for the mayor himself. Outside after the meeting, Clara was nearly speechless with emotion. "How can I ever thank you?" Blake smiled. "Have dinner with me Saturday, at my ranch this time. I've been told my venison stew is quite good. Is that all?" She asked, surprised by his modesty. "For now," he replied with a hint of something deeper in his eyes. Their Saturday dinner became a weekly tradition. Each visit revealed more about Blake: his kindness to his ranch hands, his progressive views on land management, his dry humor. Clara found herself looking forward to their time together with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. As summer turned to autumn, Blake began accompanying Clara on Sunday afternoon rides through the countryside. During one such outing, they stopped to rest by a stream, spreading a blanket under a golden-leaved cottonwood. "I've been thinking," Blake said as they shared fresh bread and cheese. "This school of yours, what if it had more resources?" "What do you mean?" Clara asked. "A proper building." "More books, perhaps even additional teachers eventually." His expression was thoughtful. "This town is growing. Education will become more important." "That sounds wonderful, but the town council barely funds what we have now," Clara replied. "What if private funding were available?" Blake suggested. Clara studied him. "You're speaking of your own money." "I've been fortunate," he said simply. "My herds have done well. I've made good investments, and I have no family to support save my sister who wants for nothing." "Blake," Clara said carefully, "people will talk if you financially support my school. They already gossip about our friendship." He met her eyes directly. "Let them talk, unless," he hesitated, "unless you're concerned about being associated with me." "No." The word came out more forcefully than she intended. "Never that. I just don't want you to feel obligated." "Clara," Blake said, taking her hand, "nothing about you has ever felt like an obligation, quite the opposite." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw, he leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were gentle but sure, and Clara found herself responding with unexpected passion. When they parted, she felt dizzy. "Neither have I," he admitted. "Not like this." The autumn leaves fell around them as they shared another kiss, longer this time. Clara felt as though something had unlocked inside her, a chamber of her heart she'd kept sealed away while pursuing her principles and independence. "I care for you deeply," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible." "And I for you," Clara whispered, "but I won't abandon my school or my beliefs." Blake smiled. "I would never ask you to. Your passion and principles are what drew me to you from the beginning." As winter approached, their relationship deepened. Blake attended town meetings with Clara, supporting her increasingly confident contributions. Together, they began planning for an expanded school, with Blake providing funding and Clara designing the curriculum. The first snow was falling when Blake invited Clara to a special dinner at his ranch. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous as he welcomed her, taking her coat and leading her to the table where candles glowed invitingly. "This looks beautiful," Clara said, noting the fine china and silver that must have been his mother's. "I wanted tonight to be special," Blake replied, pulling out her chair. After a delicious meal, Blake cleared his throat. "Clara, there's something I need to ask you." She looked at him expectantly, her heart suddenly racing. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he said, reaching for her hand. "You've challenged me, inspired me, and shown me what true partnership can be." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Opening it revealed a gold ring with a modest diamond flanked by sapphires. "I don't want to silence your voice or dim your light," he continued. I want to stand beside you, supporting your dreams while building new ones together. Clara Addington, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled Clara's eyes. Are you certain? A traditional wife I will never be, Blake laughed. Thank God for that. I don't want tradition, I want you exactly as you are, outspoken, passionate, and unstoppable. Then yes, Clara said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I will marry you. Their wedding in the spring of 1877 was unlike any Whispering Creek had seen. Clara wore blue instead of white, insisted on the removal of obey from her vows, and gave a speech at the reception that had half the women dabbing tears and the other half reconsidering their own marriages. Mayor Wilkins, still smarting from his defeat over Clara's teaching position, declined to attend. But the rest of the town embraced the union between the outspoken schoolteacher and the respected rancher. Clara moved to Blake's ranch but continued teaching, riding into town each morning. With Blake's support, she expanded the school curriculum to include advanced mathematics and science for both boys and girls. Some parents objected, but the results spoke for themselves. As Whispering Creek, students began outperforming those from neighboring towns. In the evenings, Clara and Blake would sit on their porch, discussing books, politics, and ranch business. Their conversations were as lively as ever, sometimes erupting into friendly debates that lasted well into the night. Blake never tired of hearing Clara's opinions, even when they differed from his own. You know, he said one evening as they watched the sunset, that night I found you outside the town walls was the luckiest of my life. It certainly didn't feel lucky at the time, Clara replied with a laugh. I was furious and frightened. And magnificent, Blake added. Standing there in the moonlight, lecturing the wilderness about women's rights, I knew then you were extraordinary. Clara leaned against his shoulder, and I knew you were different when you said you'd listen. I'll always listen, he promised, kissing the top of her head. A year later, their happiness multiplied with the birth of their daughter, whom they named Eleanor after Blake's mother. From her earliest days, Eleanor was encouraged to express herself fully. Blake would sit with the baby on his lap, solemnly discussing cattle prices and water rights as if she could understand every word. She needs to know her voice matters, he explained when Clara found them like this one afternoon. With us as parents, I doubt she'll ever question it, Clara replied, smiling at the pair. As Eleanor grew, she inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet strength. By age 5, she was already delivering impromptu speeches to the ranch hands, who listened with amused respect. Clara's school continued to flourish, eventually becoming the Donovan Academy for Progressive Education, with Clara as headmistress overseeing 3 additional teachers. Students came from as far as Denver to attend, boarding with approved families in town. Blake's ranching business prospered as well, allowing them to establish a scholarship fund for promising students who couldn't afford education. Clara's reputation grew throughout Colorado territory as an educational innovator, and she occasionally traveled to speak at conferences, always returning with new ideas. I never imagined this life, Clara confessed to Blake on their 10th anniversary as they sat in the expanded cabin that was now a proper ranch house. When I came west, I thought I might make a small difference as a teacher. I never dreamed of finding someone who would amplify my voice rather than silence it. Blake took her hand, his eyes as warm as they had been on that first night. And I never imagined finding a woman whose words would change not just my life, but an entire community. Outside their window, Whispering Creek had grown into a respectable town with a library, a proper school building, and a ladies' auxiliary that regularly discussed politics and social reform. We've been fortunate, Clara acknowledged. It wasn't fortune, Blake corrected gently. It was courage. Yours, to keep speaking even when they tried to silence you, and perhaps a little of mine to listen when others wouldn't. As twilight deepened into night, Clara rested her head against her husband's shoulder, thinking of that frightening night outside the town walls. What had seemed like punishment had become the beginning of her greatest joy. In the years that followed, Clara and Blake watched their daughter grow into a confident young woman, following in her mother's footsteps as an educator, but with her own distinct voice. Eleanor eventually took over the academy, when Clara decided to focus on writing educational materials for frontier schools. Blake remained Clara's most devoted supporter, reading every article and pamphlet she produced with the same attentiveness he'd shown that first night by the campfire. Their partnership became legendary in the region, the rancher and the educator who had transformed a town through the power of listening and speaking freely. When visitors asked about their unusual marriage, Blake would smile and tell them simply, "I heard a voice worth listening to, and I've been listening ever since." And Clara, who had once been punished for speaking too much, found that with the right listener, there was no such thing as too many words, only stories waiting to be shared, ideas waiting to be explored, and love waiting to be expressed in the endless conversations of a lifetime spent together.